Good morning. So I originally wrote this talk to be almost an hour long, and I have 30 minutes. We're going to move fast. It's going to be great. Let's jump on in. I do want to tell you a little bit about me, because when I'm in a session, I want to know who's talking to me. And so, first and foremost, I'm the luckiest lady in the world. I get to be married to my very best friend, Wenzel. He's easy on the eyes and super smart, so go me, trophy husband. And I'm raising 3 awesome tiny humans, and they're really cool. I don't know why the other pictures aren't populating, because technology is awesome when it works. So I transitioned into software kind of later in life, because I'm super old, as you can see. About 5 years ago, I had been a bodyguard for a time. I did medical office management, which in my country is the third circle of hell with insurance companies. And then I tried being a stay-at-home parent, and wow, that was that was a lot. And so, seriously, that middle child, that was the worst boss I've ever had. And so my husband, 25 years into a software career, said, "Sweetheart, you're bored, your brain is atrophying, and you need to do something else." I went to a web development boot camp where I learned 2 very important things. 1, I do not enjoy web development. So glad I spent 10 grand on that. And 2, I learned that there was this thing called DevOps. A gentleman actually said, have you ever heard of DevOps, Val? And I said, no. And he said, well, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but people who like DevOps are really weird, and I think you'd be perfect for it. And he wasn't wrong. So I've done DevOps roles the last 4 years, and I just transitioned to developer advocacy, because coming to conferences and meeting you fine folks feeds my soul in a way that banging out code just doesn't. So that's just who I am, just a little bit about me. The picture you're not seeing is me officiating a wedding. I do want you to know I am an ordained minister. If anyone wants to get married after my talk, come find me. We'll figure out the laws here in Porto. So we're going to talk about disaster recovery planning, which I was tasked with writing a DR plan for my first company when I was barely not an intern anymore. And one of my colleagues, when he saw the planning board, said, "Who did you irritate to get tasked with this?" And I was like, "Are you insane? I live with a condition called complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a fancy way of saying I've been through some stuff. And one of the quirky little symptoms of PTSD is that you are forever anticipating what could go wrong and how to mitigate it before it happens. I am the most paranoid person you'll ever meet, and it's delightfully fun to write a DR plan if you're me." So DR planning is important, but mostly it consists of thinking, what could go wrong, and what do we need, right? You have to think of every little thing that could happen to make your product not available to your end user or data not available to your end user, and figure out what you're going to do well ahead of time. It's it. It's really simple. Some things to keep in mind before we get into the sort of nuts and bolts. When you write a DR plan, you want it widely available, meaning you need to shove it down everyone on the team's throat. If you write it and they don't read it and they don't know it, it's worthless. So you're going to have to figure out a way to force people, encourage people to familiarize themselves with the plan. You want to frequently test out the plan, because I have a very special gift for doing things that are excellent in concept and terrible in execution. If you write out a beautiful plan that doesn't work, again, you've wasted time, and for my money, time is all we have of value. So frequently run drills. And again, you want to think of ways to stop bad things from happening before they happen. For me, it's like a logic problem. It's a super fun mind game. Really, I don't know why anyone would complain about having to write a DR plan. It's super fun. So where are we going to start? I'm going to do 2 things. So depending on the size of your company and the size of your team and most likely, if you're tasked with a DR plan, you're going to be writing about your product, right? You're going to be thinking about all the ways that your end user could be inconvenienced and mitigating that. But if you're at a startup, a very small team, a very small company, you might want to value add by adding in some more, human resource related DR plans, some logistics, some office DR plans. So we're going to briefly cover that, not extensively, because more than likely you're not going to have to do that unless you're at a tiny, tiny, tiny company. Spoiler alert, I had to do that. So hence it being in the talk. Anyone who knows me, I always start with people, because at the end of the day, the software doesn't write itself. The people write the software. We always start with people. First thing you're going to want to do when you're writing a plan is come up with a team. And depending, again, on the size of your team, your company, that could be everyone on the team, or it could be a subset of your group that is responsible for implementing whatever actions need to happen in response to an event. You can designate who's responsible for what by role or by name. And only you know what's right for your team. If you are at a huge company with high turnover, it doesn't make sense to say that Katarina's responsible for X, Y, Z, because she might not be here in a month. You might say whoever is the senior-most back-end engineer is responsible for these tasks in this event. Probably makes more sense. Whatever tasks are assigned, always have a backup person, right? Because people get sick. People go on leave. People take PTO. People don't answer their phone because they sleep through it, because they sleep like they're dead. You need to always have a backup person who is responsible for whatever tasks. And then you have to make sure that everyone has appropriate access. If you've assigned someone a task based on role and they have whatever permissions necessary in your cloud compute resource and their backup doesn't, well, now we have a problem in an event when the first person's out and your backup person is like, well, I would love to fix this, but AWS says I cannot, right? Really important to double check access. There are some things you need to decide. Who declares that an event has transpired that requires your plan going into action? Is that the engineering manager? Is that whoever sees it? Again, it depends on the size of your team, your company, what makes sense for you, but you do want to designate a person. In a previous life, I got a psychology degree, which enables me to say, would you like fries with that? And I got to spend 80 grand on it, so yay me. But one of the things you learn in a psych degree is that you never look at a room full of people and say, will someone help me? Because no one will. You make creepy eye contact with one person and say, will you help me? Yeah, look at him nod, right? Designate who's responsible, make it their task, and there's no ambiguity about who's responsible for what. And then, trickling down, who's responsible for literally every step of every response to every incident. Because again, if you look at your team and say, hey, will someone fix this? It no worky. No one's going to say yes. They're going to be like, oh, I didn't see that message. So really be granular about who's responsible for what and make everyone, sort of accountable. And then you want to think about press releases. If you have downtime for more than about 60 seconds, depending on your product and how many end users you have, someone's going to need to issue a release. Someone's going to need to throw up a landing page saying, hey, we're having problems. We'll be back in a minute. I find it's useful to put pets on that page because people find that endearing. So at a big company, I used to work at Salesforce. That's 65,000 employees. We had an entire communications team. I never had to think about anything. It was great. I love it when someone else that's your job. Good, good, good. But at a small startup, you might want to talk about, in the event of outage, who's responsible for alerting the users and or the press, depending on your product, your size, blah, blah, blah. Communications. So let's say your team communicates almost exclusively via Slack, and Slack goes down. Whoops. Now what? So whatever your primary means of communication is amongst your team, please have backups, please have alternatives that everyone's aware of, and then designate a standard order of use. So I'm not just saying this because he's in the room, but I have the coolest boss, and one of the things that he had me do when I started working at Startree was make a how to work with me document. And I had to include how I like to be communicated with from my teammates. And so I put in order of urgency. If it's not urgent, Slack's cool. A little more urgent, here's my phone number, text me. It's really important, feel free to call. I might even answer. So go ahead and designate amongst your team in the plan standard order of communication. We communicate via Slack. If Slack is down for whatever reason, now we're emailing. And then we have phone numbers. Well, that involves making some sort of central document of everyone involved in your plan with all of their contact information, right? This is a very important document that needs to be maintained. And not just employees, not just your teammates, right? So you want to have everyone that might be involved in your DR plan. Let's say that you have a plan for, you're in the office, a water main breaks, the office is flooded, we all have to go right now. That document needs to have your building maintenance supervisor and their contact information so that you can call someone and be like, hey, could you fix this? Thanks, that's why we pay you. So make sure that it's a really comprehensive document that has everyone's handles, phone numbers, emails, maybe their personal email as well. What if G Suite's down? God forbid, we'd all die. So this is important as far as making sure that everyone in an event can communicate effectively and quickly. And again, update it. And maybe that looks like at a set interval. We update this communication document quarterly. Or maybe it gets updated every time someone joins the team or leaves the team. That's a little tedious, and I don't know about y'all, but I'm way too flaky for that. I'm more of a set interval, let's set an alarm kind of gal. So we're gonna get into your product, right? The whole point is to have software up and running and end users happy and not knowing that you exist. The best compliment I ever got in my first role was one of our flight engineers said, Val, what do you do here? And I said, thank you. You only know the DevOps guy exists if they break something. That was the best compliment I've ever gotten. So the first thing you're going to want to do is think about your hardware, right? You don't want to be vague on this. So you don't want to say, we have 10 engineers and they have laptops, right? Let's say an engineer's machine's borked and the office manager, who knows nothing about development, is tasked with replacing that machine, yet you want to have all the specs. You want a very detailed inventory of everything you own so that if someone who knows nothing about it has to go to a store and replace it, they know exactly how much memory, how much RAM, everything that is needed so that someone who knows nothing can do their job well. I'm a big fan of making things easy. You're going to want to think about, okay, hey, I love it when technology works. Who gets called? So let's say you have some on-prem servers and you have a maintenance contract with someone. You need to know who that is if something goes down that's hardware related, not necessarily software related. And then have serial numbers. Go ahead and list, like in an anal retentive way, every detail about everything you own that might need to be replaced, again, so that it's super easy to do so if something breaks. Put into your plan what gets replaced. So for example, if you have a rack of 10 servers and you only really need 7 to run your product and 3 go down, are you gonna replace all 3 at once? And if so, what's your budget for that? Are you gonna spread that out over months to mitigate the cost month per month? These are just little things to think about as far as hardware goes. And again, where are we gonna go to replace things? If you have an engineer developing on a PC set to certain specifications, clearly you're not going to an Apple store to replace that. You might want to make it super easy for anyone who might have to implement this part of the plan. So we're going to talk about 3 things that, when I first wrote this talk, I sent out a survey, mostly to my friends in DevOps, site reliability engineering, and IT, and said, hey, tell me things that have gone wrong and how you handled it and if it went well or not. And that was funny. I actually wish I had an hour because some of the stories were just hilarious. But there were 3 things that came up consistently. And the people who had the most success with server incidents, be it cloud computing or on-prem, they all had one thing in common, and that is a fully mirrored replica of their production site that was constantly updated that they could fail over to immediately. And some of the people responded, yeah, we have this thing that's just sort of spun down in another region so that if something happens in our primary production region, this just goes in. And several people, were running in production in AWS and had a fully mirrored application in Google Cloud that they could spin up if AWS was down. This was probably the most consistent answer to, how do you fix this? That's a lot of work, but it's worth it. Sometimes as a parent, when I'm doing things, I think this sucks and I don't want to be working this hard. But then I remember that if I work this hard right this minute, my life will be easier tomorrow. So it's worth it. You do want to designate people in your plan to monitor for unusual traffic, decide what is unusual, and pay attention to that because, as it turns out, if you can mitigate any sort of security risks before they happen, that's always a good thing. As a former bodyguard, I'm a big fan of not having the security problem in the first place. I was not expecting this one. Version control issues came up. Several people were talking about times where they were, trying to push and pull. GitHub was having problems. They're trying to put in hot fixes because they have a major release under deadline, and no one can push or pull. And when they finally were back up, now we have all the merge conflicts, which merge conflicts, for me, are proof that someone in this universe hates us and wants us to be miserable. So do have a backup for that. Like maybe you're primarily using GitLab and you have a backup of your base in GitHub. That's expensive. It is, but come up with some sort of solution for like, what if we're under deadline and this happens? Is it likely? But if it happens, it's the worst day of your life. For my money, as an end user, if I try to go to Amazon.com, because I'm a compulsive shopper, hi, my name's Valarie, and I'm an overshopper. If I try to go to Amazon and they're down for 5-10 minutes, I'm irritated. It's mildly irritating because I am a fan of instant gratification. But if I go to Amazon and all of those saved items that I've been meaning to get have disappeared because they have data loss, now I'm angry. Now I'm going to speak to the manager, okay? Data loss is, for my money, the worst thing that your end user can experience. So this comes back to several people talked at length about that fully mirrored production site, constantly updating the data so that it was fresh. If they had to fail over in moments, well, the data is consistent. That is what I spent the most time on writing, was how to prevent data loss and make sure that my end users didn't want to talk to my boss. Make sure no one knows I exist. So, for the most part, especially if you're at a big company, these are the things you're going to be dealing with. But if you want to be a value add at a smaller company and make your boss love you, which is what I did, we didn't have someone responsible for like logistics and life planning. So I was like, cool, I'll do it. I'm a mommy. I'm used to doing all the things. Sure. So what's neat is I wrote this DR plan in January of 2020. And I took a lot of flack. My coworkers called me paranoid, and I was like, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get us, okay? And I had actually been following Wuhan, but I did write into my plan what happens if we all have to go remote overnight. Now, I was thinking natural disaster. I worked in a really old building, and what if it catches on fire? I was thinking more like that, and then, surprise, March 13th. So it was cool. The day that we shut down in Atlanta, a month later than we should have, it looked like my coworkers and I were robbing the office, but it had been in the plan in the event that we have to leave the office rapidly and not come back for some time. What is everyone expected to take home? What is everyone allowed to take home? I mean, people were shoving whiteboards in their back seats. It was awesome. Some of us were stealing the perishable snacks because that's just wasteful. Don't leave the guacamole in the fridge. It's just going to go bad. But, we had to know, what are we supposed to take? What are we allowed to take? And think about that. In our case, we really liked working collaboratively in person, so I took into account a backup location. So maybe everyone's working remotely, but there are certain meetings, certain events, certain things that you really like to be in person for. Do you want to rent out a co-working space for a day once a week? I'm from the southern part of the US, which you'll notice I use the word y'all a lot, and I've called many of you darling. Southern women are raised to be super hospitable, i.e. people pleasers, and so I volunteered my home to my colleagues. Like, you know what, y'all just come over, I'll cook some food, it'll be great. But it's something to consider. And there are other things about working from home. So working remotely, when the shutdown started, I had 3 kids in the house. They were 10 years old, 5 years old, and 9 months old. When I say that my productivity tanked, that's like saying the Titanic had a rough maiden voyage, okay? Like you don't know good time until you're nursing a 9-month-old on a call debugging a Jenkins build with your boss, with the video on because that's your team agreement. It's fun. You might want to put into your plan, if work changes, if our circumstances change, do we want to reallocate work based around people's obligations? There are people taking care of their elderly parents, there are people with children. Not everyone has the same remote work capacity. Who's responsible for deciding how work is reprioritized and reallocated? These are just little things to take into account. So you're going to laugh at this next one. I'm about to show my America, okay? So where I worked at the time was very close to the Center for Disease Control, which gets a lot of problems, and near many embassies. And also, I live in a country where an 18-year-old can go buy an assault rifle and walk into a school. So I actually wrote into our DR plan, because of where we worked and the proximity to high-profile targets, an active shooter plan. Now, I want you all to have a good laugh at how ridiculous that is. Yeah, I know. I own where I live. But unfortunately, it's something I had to consider. You might look at where you live, where you work, and what safety threats are actually pertinent to you. And just go ahead and think about it. It's a small thing, but safety matters. And just having a plan to stay safe is really comforting. However, I think we all need to think about things like fires. Fires happen. Water mains break. Building disasters happen. Hurricanes happen. Tornadoes happen. A rain of frogs could happen. I'm not saying I put it in my plan, but it could happen. It is important to think about things like fire drills if you're going to work back in the office, if you're not remote anymore. It's a little thing until it's really important. Until there's an actual fire, and you need to have some plan for where we go, how we get out of the building, where we all meet, and how we make sure no one's left behind. Human resource issues. Hey, I got made so much fun of in January of 2020, but we were a small team. We had 3 back-end engineers. What happens if 2 of them are sick for weeks? How do we reprioritize work and reallocate so that that one engineer still working doesn't hate their life? So we meet deadlines, right? It's something to consider. Do you have PTO restrictions? What happens if it's December? Everyone's about to lose their PTO. No one wants to leave money on the table. Also, it's December. We don't work in December. What happens if you have a release coming up and everyone's gone for a week? That's a problem. It's something to consider. And then leaves. We, on a very small team, had a situation where the only DevOps engineer and the lead backend engineer had babies a month apart. Ha ha ha, bye. Now, I live in a country where we don't have parental leave guaranteed, and I had to go back to work at 6 weeks. Let me tell you how pleasant I was. There's still bugs in their code for me, because if you don't sleep for 6 weeks, you shouldn't be touching code. Oh, it was fun. It's something to consider. People get in car wrecks. People get sick. People have babies. People take leaves to take care of relatives. It is something to think about. If we are cut down to a bare bones crew, Who's responsible for reallocating, and how do we decide what really matters? Something to consider. So I'm going to end with some just random advice that I got from that survey I sent out. Oh my goodness. I should have my 8-year-old work this because she's really good at pushing buttons. Just a few like random things that consistently came up. One, not everything's equally important, right? There's a huge difference between our production product is down and an intern's laptop doesn't work. Not everything's equally important. Go ahead and put into your plan some standardized time frames. If this event occurs, we guarantee we will fix it within X amount of time. But if this other thing happens, we got 72 hours, right? It is important to put time limits and make sure that everyone's sort of on the same page about what is priority and what is not. Says the woman who put an active shooter plan in place, not everything's equally likely. I spent about 10 minutes on that plan because it's not likely, but I spent about 2 days on data recovery plans. Different things matter more, and they are more likely to occur, and they require more planning. Don't stress yourself out obsessing over every last detail like I do. Don't be a crazy person. Do as I say, not as I do. And really focus on the things that are likely to occur. Put all of your energy into those, and then, maybe a little bit less energy into things that aren't likely. Testing. You have to test the plan. You can test different things quarterly. I mean, if you have a failover plan and you never test it until it's an event and it's happening, that's bad. That's not good. You want to test. Test every part of your plan and make sure that if something doesn't work as anticipated, you change the plan, right? You iterate over it. Every time you get a new team member, you're going to want to test the most likely events and test with unlikely hurdles. What does this look like? So maybe you're doing your automatic failover and only juniors and mid-levels are allowed to participate. Your seniors and leads have to sit it out. Now, is that likely to be reality? Probably not, but you need everyone on the team up to speed and able to carry out every single plan that you have for any incident. So come up with really weird, creative hurdles. Plus, it's fun. Make work fun again. And then just go ahead and test it again, and then again, and then again. Everyone that was super successful in their DR plans that responded to me, the thing that they had in common was constant testing. Want to make sure that this is the plan, everyone knows it, everyone's on the same page, and we've done it. This is easy. Because at the end of the day, why do we work? I hope it's not just to pay the bills. I work to feed my family, but I also work to feed my soul, and I don't want to work late at night, and I don't want to work on the weekends, and I like the comfort of a DR plan because it ensures I get to live a life, right? That's the whole point. When you're writing a DR plan, keep in the back of your head, you are planning to make sure that you and your coworkers don't hate your lives and that you get to spend time with the people you love and do fun stuff rather than spending days on end in front of your laptop thinking, why didn't I go into something else, right? Thank you so much. I hope that if anyone has to write a DR plan, they enjoy it as much as I did. Can.
So we have time for one question for Valarie. So if anyone wants to shout one now, just feel free.
I just finger gunned, just throwing that out.
Hi, great talk. One thing is a fact about the unlikely hurdles. We already did in our disaster recovery plans to put everyone in toilets and stuff like that, just to make sure that everyone is separated. So no people in the same room, just everywhere we can. Other thing is that in the first part of your plan, I was not very clear.
Okay.
One thing is, we can treat disaster recovery plans as like the incident management. Like, for example, my service have an issue and can be partial like a disaster recovery plan, right? Or you see as a different thing, that instant management of a failure product, because the code is bad, it's not a disaster recovery plan. What is your aspect? Is that in disaster recovery can cover code issues or only hardware and external issues?
No, I mean, honestly, it depends on what you're tasked with. If you're on a huge team at a huge company, the ask might be different than if you're on a very small team at a small company. But at the end of the day, all DR plans need to cover what do we need to have working correctly for our product to have as close to 100% uptime with no data loss at all times. That's the meat and potatoes, if you will. That's the most important thing. Other things matter depending on your team, depending on your ask. And I can't say what's right for your team because I don't know how big your company is, I don't know how many people, I don't, but I'm trying to think of a situation where you wouldn't be tasked with what do we need to maintain uptime and have no data loss. That is the most important chunk of a DR plan.
Okay, thank you.
So a big round of applause to Valarie.